Hi, this is my presentation for my final for the interviewing, negotiation, mediation, and arbitration with the case with Emma, Mr. Jones, and Mrs. Potts. For my initial interview with the client, I would start with an icebreaker. I would help my client feel at ease, maybe talk about the weather, jacket she's wearing, or something similar, how her day's been going. And then I'd offer her something to drink, like a glass of water. Then I would want to build a rapport with her. I want to make sure that she feels uh, welcome, that she's important. So I would make sure I do not have any distractions around me. I would make sure that the meeting doesn't have interruptions and that my full attention is on her. From there, I would start interviewing of what brought her in today. I would follow up and find out if she received any previous uh, legal advice before coming to see me for the interview. Then I would follow up and ask, what is Emma looking for to resolve this matter? From there, I can start the process for negotiations. So for preparing for negotiations for Emma, I am explaining that Mr. Jones should be held responsible for the accident due to him being the business owner. The safety of the customers is his responsibility at his restaurant. Um, Negotiations with Mrs. Potts would be Emma's dog showed no signs of aggression. Emma's dog had been in the place before without any situations, and Emma's dog only attacked because Mrs. Potts uh, was had attacked her table and the soup landed on her. So, from the dog's perspective, he was protecting his owner. The height of the dog enclosure or pet enclosure was not correct and in violation with the Driscolltown Ordinance 1-0012. Arrived at my negotiating strategy with Mrs. Potts and Mr. Jones differently because I saw Mr. Jones being primarily responsible since it was his restaurant, his place of business, and he is responsible for the safety of his customers. And with Mrs. Potts, walked in like a customer, like Emma. For mediation, I prepared uh, that the fault was on Mr. Jones for the accident, and I want to come to an agreement with Mrs. Potts that Emma and her are both the customers and that they should both be holding Mr. Jones responsible for the situation. And I'm prepared to argue the case before arbitration and what appropriate outcome I should have, anticipate my strengths and weaknesses. So in arbitration, I'm going to argue. Um, Emma went into the hot spoon for a bowl of hot clam chowder. She loved this place because she's able to bring her dog Horton there. She has gone there before with her dog with no problems. This was the perfect place for a hot meal and a constructed outside play area for her dog on a rainy day where it can't bring your dog much anywhere else. So there was special seating for dog owners so she could watch her dog play. So this looked like a fine place for her to go that day. Emma was sitting at her table with her hot bowl of soup when Mrs. Potts crashed into Emma's table and the hot clam chowder was all over Emma from head to toe. Um, as Emma was down and in pain from the burn of the soup, Emma's dog Horton, fearing for Emma, came to his owner's rescue and bit Mrs. Potts to defend Emma. Um, this caused Emma to be out of work for a month, and she had 15% of her body with second-degree burns. So she was clearly in pain too. Emma should not be held responsible for Mrs. Potts' injuries, as she was attacked by Mrs. Potts. Mrs. Potts may argue she slipped because it was raining outside and she didn't see a wet floor sign. But factually, she brought her shoes in wet and she knew it was raining outside. She knew she was walking on wetness outside, and she should have been more careful entering the restaurant knowing her shoes were wet. She should have tried to gain control before she got all the way to Emma's table. There were other tables along the way, and she still crashed into Emma's table, flipping the bowl of hot soup onto Emma. The dog bite Mrs. Potts um, received, uh, um, the dog was protecting their owner, and Emma had absolutely no way to know her dog jumped over the enclosed area and had no way to stop her dog when the dog was attacking Mrs. Potts. Mrs. Potts had put Emma in a situation where she was in pain and was unable to get to her dog. Emma was also not aware that Mr. Jones had built that pet enclosure 2 inches short. The pet enclosure height requirement is 3 feet, and he built it at 2 feet 10 inches. Emma's dog has never jumped out of the enclosure before, and she trusted that the business owner had built to the correct height that needed to be built. When Emma decided to eat at the diner that day, she thought she'd be safe for her and to bring her dog to the restaurant like every previous time she had gone. Mr. Jones, as the business owner, should be held responsible for not taking the precautions in his restaurant for safety measures such as wet floors. Mrs. Potts should not be able to hold Emma responsible for her dog because she was being attacked and injured by Mrs. Potts. I would like to see the lawsuit against Emma dropped from Mrs. Potts and seeking that Mr. Jones and the Hot Spoon restaurant paid damages of $200,000 under theory of joint and several liability. Emma lost a month of work, and she had 15% of her body with second-degree burns. She's unable to pay her bills because of this, and she has scars that will stay with her because of this situation. In return, if she receives what is she's asking, Emma will agree to handle this matter quietly and not discuss it any further so the restaurant will not lose its reputation and to keep what happened to Mrs. Potts private. And that is how I would handle the arbitrator situation in hopes that the arbitrator would see Emma's point of view of how Emma was an innocent bystander that got dragged into whatever else was going on. The only issues I see is that possibly they could turn around and say, well, if there was any chance that your dog could have been aggressive, you should have not brought your dog out. Um, um, I do not see any other way it would be Emma's fault besides trying to use the dog, which again I said that with the correct height of enclosure, situation could have went differently. And Emma's dog had been there previously and never had a problem, and the dog was always happy when he was there playing. Emma was also sitting at the correct place that she should have been sitting, so she was trying to watch her dog until Mrs. Potts made it unable for her to see her dog or control her dog. Mrs. Potts can further go against Mr. Jones, but as for Emma, I feel the case from Mrs. Potts should be dropped, and Emma should be able to seek um, damages for $200,000 for what she endured on that day. Thank you.